50, Living in the Presence of God. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 25, we read of a king, capitalized, for the reference is to God, who welcomes certain devotees to the divine consciousness, saying, I was an hungry, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in, naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. The elect asked him when it was they had served him in these ways, and the king answered, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. To see God as residing in every human being, as indeed he does, is to open oneself to limitless opportunities for serving him. Paramahansa Yogananda, in Autobiography of a Yogi, described a saint who lived in this consciousness as the greatest man of humility I ever knew. He described a seemingly chance encounter with this saint. Another day found me walking alone near the Howrah Railroad Station. I stood for a moment by a temple, silently criticizing a small group of men with a drum and cymbals who were violently reciting a chant. How undevotionally they used the Lord's divine name in mechanical repetition, I reflected. My gaze was astonished by the rapid approach of Master Mahashaya. Sir, how come you here? The saint ignored my question, answered my thought. Isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds sweet from all lips, ignorant and wise? He passed his arm around me affectionately. I found myself carried on his magic carpet to the merciful presence. If you would see God, watch for him everywhere. If you would hear his voice, listen for it in all sounds, and also in their supporting silences. If you would know God, seek his wisdom beyond merely human knowledge. The Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter states, one who beholds my presence everywhere and all things dwelling equally in me, he never loses loving sight of me, nor I of him, through all eternity. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om. Om. Om.
Yet another beautiful reading, this time from Whispers from Eternity. And this prayer, poem, and demand is number 152. Teach me not to be deceived by the senses. O divine teacher, train me to recognize the difference between my soul's lasting happiness and the passing pleasures of the senses. Keep my eyes open, that I be not deceived by my senses, decked out as they are in stolen royal trappings and in the mirage cloak of false happiness, as thus disguised they try to enter the mansion of my life. Discipline my unwise, wayward senses, that my pleasures be spiritualized, and that I look ever beyond the illusion of glittering, visible forms to find divine joy hidden, simply dressed in the white robe of humility. So those senses quite tricky. Our topic today is about living in the presence and how comforting it is to know that we are never alone, that we're always living in the presence. From the time we arrived on this planet until the time we leave, we've always been in that divine presence. The thing is, we may not be aware of it, or perhaps we're just aware of it when we feel we've been behaving appropriately, or we're meditating, we're in prayer, we're in good space within. We may feel it, but the presence is there always, whether we feel it or not. And I think that's the topic that we really need to discuss today. This is about relationship with the divine, how to find it, how to develop it, how to grow it, how to deepen it, how to merge with that divine experience. There is a great monk named Brother Lawrence, who was born in the early 1600s in France. And after he went to war and served his country in that way, he came back and entered a monastery and became a monk. He didn't think he could aspire to priesthood because he came from very humble origins and he was an unlettered person. But he was very content to serve God by being a monk. And he took on all the menial chores and tasks that his superiors gave him with great delight. He never complained. He never thought something was below him. He just took everything as an assignment from God, not from his superiors, from God. And he practiced what he eventually named in his letters. He wrote many, many, many letters, which later were compiled after his death, about practicing the presence of God in every moment of your life. So from your waking state until you drop off into sleep, you're always aware. You're always practicing that divine experience. Even though he was not an educated man, he exuded, over time, he came to exude a tremendous aura of peace. And many scholars and erudites sought him out for counsel and spiritual direction. So how does this person who does not have much as far as an education and resources to develop himself find the divine in that very humble state? How do we develop this attunement with the divine? Perhaps we can start by finding it out in nature. One of my friends told me she recently went to a forest bathing experience. And in that outing, people were invited to hug the trees and bury themselves inside under the leaves, take seclusion from the group and just do some deep breathing, some techniques to connect them with the outer environment. And she found that incredibly healing and satisfying. We can also experience the divine through a beautiful sunset or sunrise, a walk on the ocean, anything that reconnects us with the greater part of nature. We can also connect with our pets. People's beloved pets are definitely divine expressions, and we take a lot of delight from interacting with our animal friends. But when it comes to relating to people, that's where the situation gets a little bit tricky. So Roy just read this reading, but I just wanted to read this tiny little excerpt of what it said in the Bible. Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. And we may not ever want to offend or hurt the divine. And we may never want to hurt or offend other people either. But how do we relate to ourselves? We're not so kind to ourselves sometimes. And wouldn't you be part of the brethren, the creation, part of that expression of the divine on earth? So nowadays, people find it incredibly difficult to relate to each other, especially people who belong to perhaps a different political party. In the past, we used to agree to disagree. Yeah, those are your views, these are mine, but let's see where we meet. What are the commonality of this relationship? Today, that doesn't exist. Today, if somebody belongs to a different party, sometimes the person becomes an enemy. Even family members have broken up. So how do we, as yogis, as truth seekers, come to build bridges, to build understanding, to build tolerance? It is said that God created the universe for our entertainment and our edification. The situation we're currently going through is certainly not entertaining, but it surely is edifying. It's a great opportunity to really sharpen that spiritual sword and gain in understanding and grow spiritually. If we view others as extensions of our own self, then it is of utmost importance that we view ourselves in good light. So how often do you offer yourself compassion? How often do you give yourself that self-compassion? Can you forgive yourself easily? Or are we very intolerant and impatient of ourselves when we err? And that is certainly not something we want to share with others. What we did in the past is gone. There's no point in dragging on all that baggage with us, because that is what we express onto others. When we're intolerant of ourselves, when we're impatient with ourselves, we also tend to be intolerant and impatient of others. There is this great saint, Saint Bernadette, who was a young peasant girl born in Lourdes, France. And she had the apparitions, she had many apparitions of the Virgin. And people came from far and wide to visit Bernadette and learn about these apparitions and be healed and so on. But the authorities of the church and the authorities of the town of Lourdes kept interrogating her and questioning her and getting her to trip up and contradict herself in her statements in order to expose her as a charlatan. But she never did. She was always spot on in the way she remembered how the lady appeared to her, the way she was dressed, what she told her, and so on. So anyways, when she was about 20 years old, she retired to a monastery. And in the monastery, she had a superior, a nun, who was very hard on this young woman. And she constantly asked her questions and suspected that somebody so young and ignorant and who had not suffered one bit in life would be worthy of the apparition of the divine. So one day she was questioning her about her life and how she had suffered, because she thought she needed to suffer in order to have that divine gift come to her. The nun herself said she had suffered, she had mortified herself, she had denied herself, she had done everything she could possibly do to have a close relationship with the divine, and yet nothing had come to her. So Bernadette decided, perhaps I can show you something. And she lifted her habit and showed the nun a huge tumor that was on her leg. The nun was horrified, and the doctor was immediately asked to come and take care of Bernadette. He diagnosed her with an advanced tuberculosis of the bone and told people that that condition was excruciatingly painful. And yet no one ever heard a complaint out of Bernadette. So needless to say, that nun was transformed when she heard this story. So how do we offer ourselves kindness so we can be kinder with others? We need to let go of what we already did. The past is done. Bless it and release it. We were living in the presence then, as we are living in the presence now. In our moments of grace, we were living in the presence, and in the moments of greatest disgrace, we were living in the presence. Moments, times of praise, times of shame, we were always living in the presence. There is no place and no time when we are not living in the presence. When God, when the truth, when the real is not. So how do we cultivate that? How do we make peace in our hearts? To have a healthy, functioning relationship with the divine, we need to have a healthy, functioning relationship with ourselves. Some great teacher, I don't remember who, may have been Vivekananda, but I'm not sure, said, you cannot believe in God until you first believe in yourself. So how do we do that? How do we take back that responsibility? Once we make peace with ourselves in our hearts, only then can we be tolerant and forgiving of ourselves. And when we are tolerant and forgiving of ourselves, we can be tolerant and forgiving of others. And when we are tolerant and forgiving of others, we deepen our relationship with the divine. So to go deeper into the divine, we need to offer that tolerance and love to others after we first found it in ourselves. There's a story about a monk who was obsessed with finding the truth. And he asked teachers and gurus and holy men, to direct him. And they thought he wasn't ready, he wasn't prepared, so they didn't want to take him on as an apprentice, as a chela. But one master did. And he said, first, I have to train you. You have to go through many different experiences before you are able to know the truth. So this young monk was determined, yes, I'll do anything. So he had one of the experiences, he had to go to Tibet and fight some tigers, and then he had to go to the Himalayas and meditate and fast for 40 days, and he accomplished that. Then he had to go and sit on the hot sands in the desert and only survive with hydration he found in the cactuses. He did that. Then he had to travel far and learn all the different holy books of the world. He had to recite the Vedas, and he went one after the other of all these tests. He aced. So eventually his teacher said, well, now you're ready to know the truth. So he was told that he had to travel to an island, and there would be people there waiting for him to guide him to where he needed to go. So off he goes in this rowboat. Somebody takes him to this very desolate island, and there are monks walking around with hoods in silence. And once he arrives, a monk receives him and points him up a stairwell. And he says he must go up. Nobody spoke, so he assumed he had to go up. And there at the top of the stairwell was a lectern with a book, and that was the book of truth. And finally, after years of being tested and waiting and praying to know truth, he has arrived. And so with a pounding heart, he opens the book, and in the mirror, he sees a reflection of his own self. If we want to have a deep relationship with the divine, we need to make an effort to make ourselves available to the moment, to feel the breath entering and exiting our nostrils, to take up residence in the spine and anchor ourselves at the spiritual eye. Then we're living in the presence. Now we're home. This is our abode. And in this state, you are aware that you're living in the presence. This is how we are invited to live life from the inside out. This is how we learn to relate to our highest nature. And when we relate to our highest nature, only then can we relate to others from their own highest nature. And that is good relationship. Very good relationship. The affirmation today was practicality. It's interesting how Swami brings a reading from living in the presence and having that huge topic so abstract, and then bringing it right down into something we can really relate to. So this is the beauty of these teachings. We are offered esoteric, sometimes teachings of an abstruse nature, but here they are presented to us in scientific techniques that we can follow and that we can apply. Master used to take his monks to the movies, and when he'd see the monks totally absorbed in the movies and in the action, he would tap them on the shoulder and say, look back at the beam of the cameragrapher that was up filming. He always told people to get back to the beam. But when we're not at the movies, when we're experiencing the movies of life, of our everyday life, and when we're in states of conflict and struggle and difficulty, we need to get back to the beam. And that's the breath. That's bringing you back. It's landing you in what is real. Then you have a good base. You have a place from where you can operate and deal with all those struggles. Now, hopefully everybody who was listening, you have been listening to what I've been talking about, maybe. Yet, are you also aware of your breath? These teachings are not just to pull out the heavy equipment when we're in times of distress and difficulty. It's all the time. And that is our responsibility as yogis, to anchor ourselves, to create good relationship with ourselves in order to have good relationship with others, in order to have a deep and sweet relationship with the divine. Then we always know we're in good space and in good company. But what derails us? What takes us away from these good spaces? And that's the mind. We go off into thinking. We think we can think our way through life. Somewhere I read that we seek, in the West specifically, in Western society, we seek too much information and not enough transformation. So there is a joke here that a rabbi had a congregation who kept assaulting him with questions and questions and questions. And how is this and how is that? And how does this connect here and there? So he was fed up. He just thought he needed to do something about this. So he set up a little booth and put a sign above the booth. And it said, $100 for 2 questions answered. Oh, so all the members of the congregation, some made appointments and scheduled to see the rabbi at different times, but the most impatient ones just lined up. So the first one to see the rabbi was a very wealthy member, and he came up and sat in the little chair across from the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, isn't $100 a little too much for 2 questions?" "Yes," answered the rabbi. "And your second question is?" And that's the mind. It never delivers, does it? It always leaves us hanging. There's a flatness to it. So let's get back to where we belong, into our abode, spine residing at the point between the eyebrows and the breath, linking every moment of your life together. So settle into your space. Know that your life is unfolding just as it has to, and you are just where you need to be in order to keep developing a relationship with the divine. And living in the presence is a good thing. Being aware that we're living in the presence is a good thing. It doesn't get better than that.